The air in Sonora's underground market was thick with a mingled sense of exotic spices, machine oil, and the peculiar tang of alien perspiration from a dozen different species. 13-year-old Arlo pulled his worn jacket tighter around his skinny frame, trying to appear casual as he slipped between the crowded stalls. Security drones occasionally buzzed overhead, their blinking sensors barely visible through the haze of smoke and vapor that hung beneath the market's dilapidated ceiling. It was Arlo's weekly ritual, sneaking out from the Intergalactic Authority's youth residence facility when a night shift supervisor nodded off, spending those precious few hours of freedom hunting for discarded treasures among the market's chaos. Being an orphan on a frontier transit station like Sonora meant being forgotten, just another statistic in the GA's overcrowded system. No one particularly cared where Arlo went, as long as he showed up for daily registration and didn't cause trouble. "Hey, Earth Boy," hissed a green-skinned vendor with 3 eyes as Arlo passed. "Want to see something special today? Just came in." Very rare. Arlo hesitated. Vendors often try to scam naive kids, selling them junk disguised as valuable contraband. But something in the merchant's nervous demeanor caught his attention. "What is it?" Arlo approached cautiously, his hand instinctively checking the small pouch where he kept his meager savings, scraps of universal currency units he'd gathered over months from odd jobs and errands. The vendor glanced left and right before carefully lifting a dirty cloth from a small container. Inside, nestled in what looked like synthetic packing material, sat an egg-like object approximately the size of Arlo's fist. Its surface was a swirl of midnight blue and silver, with faint, intricate patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. "Last draconoid egg," whispered the vendor. "Very dangerous to have. GA would pay fortune to destroy it, but I sell to you cheap. Only 20 units. Arlo's heart skipped. 20 units was exactly what he had saved, the sum total of 6 months of work. Logic told him to walk away. Who knew if the egg was even real? And if it was, the vendor had just admitted it was illegal. "Why so cheap?" Arlo asked, his voice cracking slightly. "If it's worth a fortune." The vendor's middle eye blinked rapidly. "Bad luck to have in shop. Already had GA sniffing around. Need gone now. 20 units, final price." Arlo stared at the egg. Something about it called to him in a way he couldn't explain, a strange, almost magnetic pull. Maybe it was the fact that this egg, like him, was unwanted, cast aside, deemed troublesome. Or maybe it was simple curiosity about what could possibly hatch from such a peculiar object. Without fully understanding why, Arlo reached into his pouch and counted out his entire savings. The vendor snatched the currency chips, hastily wrapping the egg in a thermal cloth and thrusting it into Arlo's hands. "No returns," the merchant said, already turning away. "And we never met." The egg felt warm against Arlo's palms, surprisingly heavy for its size. He quickly tucked it inside his jacket and began the careful journey back to the youth facility, heart pounding with every drone that passed overhead and every GA officer that walked by. For the first time in years, he felt something besides loneliness and boredom. He felt purpose. Back at the facility, Arlo slipped through the service entrance and navigated the dimly lit corridors to his sleeping pod. The massive dormitory housed over 200 orphans, each assigned a sleep unit barely larger than a coffin, stacked in rows 5 high. Privacy was non-existent, but Arlo had long ago discovered that a loose panel in the back of his pod gave access to a small maintenance shaft, his secret hideaway. Once safely inside, Arlo examined his purchase more carefully. The egg pulsed with faint light, the patterns on its surface more pronounced now. He created a small nest from his spare clothes and placed the egg gently inside, wondering what he'd gotten himself into. Draconoid. The word meant nothing to him, but there was something almost magical about holding a new life in his hands, especially when his own had felt so meaningless for so long. "I don't know what you are," he whispered to the egg, "but I guess we're stuck with each other now." That night, Arlo slept fitfully, dreaming of stars and flames and the sensation of flying. He woke suddenly in the early hours, alerted by a strange cracking sound from his hideaway. Careful not to wake the others, he slipped into the maintenance shaft. The egg was fracturing, hairline cracks spreading across its iridescent surface. Arlo watched, mesmerized, as pieces began to fall away, revealing glimpses of something moving inside. With a final push, the creature emerged, small, no larger than a kitten, with scales the color of twilight and eyes that gleamed. Like distant galaxies. It wasn't quite what Arlo had expected. Not quite a lizard, not quite a bird. Its body was serpentine but compact, with small limbs ending in delicate claws, and tiny wing-like appendages that seemed too fragile for flight. What struck Arlo most were those eyes, deep, intelligent, somehow ancient despite the creature's obvious infancy. "Hi there," Arlo whispered, extending a cautious finger. The tiny dragon regarded him for a moment, then butted its head gently against his hand, making a soft, trilling sound that resonated in Arlo's chest. An unexpected warmth spread through him. Not physical heat, but something deeper, an emotional connection he'd never experienced before. "You need a name," Arlo said, smiling as the creature climbed awkwardly into his palm, its claws tickling his skin. "How about Theo? I read that in some old Earth language it means flame." Theo chirped, seemingly in approval, then opened his tiny jaws wide in what appeared to be a yawn, displaying miniature but sharp teeth. Arlo's smile faded as reality set in. What did draconoids eat? How fast would it grow? And most importantly, how would he keep it hidden from the facility supervisors? The immediate problem, however, was feeding his new friend. Arlo cautiously offered bits of his morning ration, a protein bar that all residents received. Theo sniffed at it, then turned away in apparent disgust. Several other food items met the same rejection until, in desperation, Arlo tried his most prized possession, a packet of spicy sauce he'd found in the market weeks ago. He dabbed a tiny amount on his finger and offered it to Theo. The reaction was immediate. The small dragon licked the sauce, eyes widening, then lunged forward to clean Arlo's finger completely, making excited chirping noises. As Arlo watched in amazement, Theo seemed to grow slightly before his eyes, the scales becoming more vibrant. "You like spicy things, huh?" Arlo grinned. "That's going to be a problem. Spicy stuff isn't easy to come by around here." Over the next few days, Arlo established a routine. He'd sneak Theo bits of his food, supplemented by whatever spicy or energy-rich items he could scavenge from the facility's kitchen waste. The dragon grew at an alarming rate, doubling in size within a week. More concerning were the increasingly strange occurrences around them. Metal objects near Theo would occasionally vibrate or shift position. The lights in Arlo's sleeping area would flicker when the dragon became excited. Most startling of all, Arlo began experiencing vivid dreams. Images of vast, beautiful cities unlike any human architecture, massive draconoids soaring through skies of unfamiliar colors, and an overwhelming sense of loss and fear. One evening, as Arlo returned to his hiding spot with smuggled food, he found Theo huddled in a corner, trembling. "What's wrong, buddy?" Arlo whispered, reaching out to stroke the dragon's neck, now as thick as his wrist. As his fingers touched the iridescent scales, Arlo's vision blurred. Suddenly, he wasn't in the maintenance shaft anymore. He was seeing through someone else's eyes, watching armored GA officers loading containers marked with biohazard symbols. Inside each container, an egg identical to the one Theo had hatched from. The vision shifted to show a laboratory where adult draconoids were restrained, probes attached to their bodies as scientists in protective gear took readings from complex equipment. Arlo gasped, pulling his hand away. The vision vanished, but the emotions lingered: rage, sorrow, and a desperate need to escape. He looked at Theo with new understanding. "They're hunting your kind," he whispered. "That's why the vendor was so eager to get rid of your egg." As if in response to his words, the facility's emergency sirens began to wail. A mechanical voice echoed through the corridors. "Attention, all personnel. Commence immediate search protocol. Class A bioform detected on premises. Contamination en route." Arlo's blood ran cold. Somehow they knew. Perhaps Theo's growing energy signature had triggered sensors, Or maybe someone had reported seeing something unusual. Regardless, they had minutes at most before the facility would be swarming with GA officers. "We have to go," Arlo said, quickly gathering his few possessions. Theo seemed to understand, climbing onto Arlo's shoulder and wrapping his tail securely around the boy's arm. With the facility in search mode, the regular exits would be sealed. Arlo's only chance was the maintenance tunnels. He'd explored them enough to know that one particular shaft connected to the station's general ventilation system. It would be tight, and there was the risk of security scanners, but it was their only hope. They had barely entered the tunnel when heavy footsteps and authoritative voices filled the dormitory behind them. Arlo crawled as fast as he could, Theo now moving ahead, seemingly able to sense which turns to take. The dragon's scales had begun to emit a faint glow, providing just enough light to navigate by. "Halt and identify!" The command echoed from somewhere behind them, followed by the sound of pursuit. Arlo's heart hammered in his chest as he pushed himself forward, scraping his elbows and knees on the rough metal. Ahead, Theo had stopped at a junction, looking back urgently. "Which way?" Arlo gasped. In response, Theo darted down the left passage. Arlo followed, the tunnel growing narrower. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter. The officers, in their bulky armor, couldn't squeeze through the smaller openings. After what felt like hours of desperate crawling, they emerged onto a maintenance platform overlooking the market level. Arlo's clothes were torn, his body bruised, but they had escaped the immediate danger. The market below was in chaos. GA officers were conducting searches, scanning each vendor's wares and questioning shoppers. "They're really serious about finding you," Arlo whispered to Theo, who was now about the size of a small dog, his wings beginning to look more functional. "We need to get off this level, maybe even off the station." Getting off Sonora wouldn't be easy without identification or credits, but Arlo had heard rumors of smugglers who transported cargo, and sometimes people, without GA approval. Finding such individuals would be dangerous, but staying on the station seemed increasingly impossible. As they cautiously made their way through service corridors, avoiding the main thoroughfares, Arlo felt Theo grow tense on his shoulder. The dragon's head swiveled toward a grimy wall panel, and to Arlo's surprise, the panel began to vibrate, then slide aside, revealing a hidden passage. "How did you—" Arlo began, but fell silent as Theo nudged him toward the opening. The passage led to an abandoned storage area. The air was stale, suggesting no one had been there in years, but what caught Arlo's attention were the strange markings on the walls, symbols similar to the patterns he'd seen on Theo's egg. Theo jumped from his shoulder, approaching the wall with apparent recognition. The dragon pressed his snout against one particular symbol, and as he did, the marking began to glow with the same luminescence as Theo's scales. "Is this your language?" Arlo asked, watching in awe as more symbols illuminated in sequence. The floor beneath them shuddered, and a section of the wall slid away, revealing a small chamber beyond. Inside was a single pedestal, and upon it, a crystalline object shaped like a multifaceted star. Theo chirped excitedly, bouncing from foot to foot. When Arlo hesitated, the dragon gently bit his pant leg, tugging him toward the crystal. "You want me to take it?" Arlo asked, reaching out cautiously. As his fingers closed around the cool crystal, his mind exploded with images, vivid, overwhelming information that coursed through his consciousness faster than he could process. He saw the history of the Draconoids, an ancient species who had once been peaceful explorers of the galaxy. He learned of their incredible abilities, not just flight and fire, but telepathy, energy manipulation, and a symbiotic relationship with technology unlike anything humans had developed. Most critically, he saw the truth of the GA's interest. The Draconoids weren't classified as dangerous because they posed a threat. They were hunted because their unique biology allowed them to detect and neutralize certain types of weapons. The GA, or at least a faction within it, had been developing planet-killer technology in violation of galactic treaties. The Draconoids were the only species who could naturally sense these weapons, and potentially disable them. The revelation left Arlo gasping, leaning against the pedestal for support. Theo nuzzled his hand comfortingly. "They're exterminating your entire species to hide their weapons program," Arlo said, his voice thick with horror and anger. "And Sonora, this station." He looked at Theo with widening eyes. "It's not just a transit hub. It's a weapons testing facility, isn't it?" Theo's solemn gaze was all the confirmation he needed. The crystal continued to pulse in Arlo's hand, showing him more, a hidden installation beneath Sonora's lower levels. The final countdown to a test that would demonstrate the weapon's capabilities on an uninhabited moon in this system. If successful, the technology would be deployed to GA outposts throughout the galaxy, allowing them to hold entire planets hostage with the threat of annihilation. "We have to stop them," Arlo whispered, though he had no idea how a 13-year-old orphan and a baby dragon could possibly stand against the might of the Galactic Authority. Theo chirped, then closed his eyes in concentration. The crystal in Arlo's hand grew warmer, projecting a holographic map of the station, with a pulsing light indicating their location and another marking what appeared to be their destination, deep in Sonora's restricted lower levels. "You want us to go there?" Arlo asked incredulously. "That's probably the most heavily guarded area on the station." Theo's expression, if dragons could be said to have expressions, conveyed something between determination and apology. He projected a simple thought into Arlo's mind, an impression rather than words. "There is no other way." Arlo took a deep breath. All his life, he'd been invisible, unimportant, just another orphan in the system. Now, suddenly, he was faced with a responsibility so enormous it seemed absurd. Yet looking at Theo, at this incredible being who had trusted him from the moment of hatching, he found a courage he didn't know he possessed. "Okay," he said finally, "but we're going to need help." Their first step was acquiring less conspicuous clothing for Arlo and some way of concealing Theo, who was now too large to hide under a jacket. The storage area yielded some old maintenance uniforms, and Arlo fashioned a crude carrier that looked like a tool bag but had air holes for Theo. Next came the challenge of navigating the station without triggering security scans. The crystal, which Arlo now wore on a cord around his neck, seemed to help. When GA drones approached, it would warm against his skin, giving him time to duck into shadows or service corridors. As they made their way toward the station's core, they encountered unexpected allies. An elderly janitor who'd always shown Arlo kindness provided key cards to access restricted areas. A vendor from a market, upon recognizing Theo's species, quietly offered them nutrition packs specially formulated for energy-intensive metabolisms. "My world was saved by draconoids during the stellar collapse," the vendor explained in hushed tones. "We have not forgotten our debt to your kind, little one." Each act of kindness reinforced Arlo's determination. Perhaps he and Theo weren't as alone in this fight as he'd feared. Their journey downward through Sonora's levels was fraught with close calls. Twice they nearly encountered GA patrols, and once they had to hide in a waste disposal chute to avoid detection. Theo was growing noticeably with each passing hour, especially after consuming the specialized nutrition packs, and was now the size of a large dog, his wings nearly functional. The crystal guided them to a maintenance airlock on the station's lowest level, an access point to the secret installation that wasn't on any official schematics. Getting through would require administrative clearance they didn't have. "Any ideas?" Arlo whispered to Theo, who had emerged from his carrier now that they were alone. The dragon approached the security panel, examining it with intelligent eyes. Then, to Arlo's astonishment, Theo extended a foreclaw and inserted it into the panel's data port. The dragon's scales glowed briefly, and the panel emitted a series of accepting beeps as the airlock doors began to cycle open. "You can interface with technology," Arlo breathed. "That's incredible." Beyond the airlock lay a stark contrast to the crowded, chaotic upper levels of Sonora. The secret installation was all polished metal and bright lights, with clear signage directing authorized personnel to various sections. Most alarming was a digital countdown visible on screens throughout the facility, 4 hours, 37 minutes, and 22 seconds, and decreasing. Less than 5 hours until the weapon test. They moved cautiously through the corridors, the crystal guiding them toward what appeared to be the installation's command center. Along the way, they passed laboratories where scientists worked on equipment Arlo couldn't begin to comprehend. In one chamber, a massive device dominated the space, cone-shaped, comprised of concentric rings of an unfamiliar silvery metal, pulsing with energy that made the air around it waver. "Is that it?" Arlo whispered. "The planet killer?" Theo growled softly, confirming Arlo's suspicion. The dragon's distress was palpable. Being near the weapon clearly caused him physical discomfort. They had nearly reached the command center when disaster struck. A security scanner hidden in the ceiling detected Theo's unique biosignature, triggering alarms throughout the facility. Red lights flashed as heavy security doors began to close, threatening to trap them. "Run!" Arlo shouted, abandoning stealth as they sprinted for the command center. They barely made it through the final doorway before it sealed, finding themselves in a large circular room filled with control stations, view screens, and startled GA personnel. At the center stood a raised platform where a severe-looking woman in a high-ranking GA uniform was addressing a group of officials. Admiral Vex, one of the technicians, called out, pointing at the intruders. "Security breach." The Admiral turned, her face hardening at the sight of Arlo and Theo. "A child? And a Draconoid?" She signaled to the security officers. "Contain them. The specimen is valuable for research." Guards moved to surround them, weapons raised. Arlo stepped protectively in front of Theo, though the dragon had grown large enough now that the gesture was somewhat futile. "You can't do this," Arlo shouted, his voice stronger than he expected. "Using planet-killer weapons violates every treaty the GA has signed. The Council would never approve this project." Admiral Vex's eyes narrowed. "The Council doesn't understand what's necessary to maintain order. Sometimes fear is the only language that rebellious systems understand." She looked at Theo with cold assessment. "Interesting that you've bonded with the creature. Our previous attempts to form connections with captured specimens were unsuccessful. Because you were trying to use them as weapons," Arlo retorted. "They're intelligent beings with their own civilization." Vex laughed. "Civilization? They're animals with useful abilities, nothing more. And you, boy, are nothing but a system orphan. Nobody will miss you when you disappear." The Admiral's words stung because they echoed Arlo's deepest fears, that he was disposable, that his existence meant nothing. But then he felt Theo press against his side, sharing a surge of emotion that washed away those doubts. To Theo, he mattered, and right now, to the future of countless worlds, they both mattered very much. The crystal around Arlo's neck began to glow intensely, responding to the heightened emotions and danger. Theo looked at it, then at Arlo, projecting a clear thought. Together, understanding instinctively what was needed, Arlo placed one hand on Theo's head and gripped the crystal with the other. Energy surged between them, creating a visible aura that caused the advancing guards to hesitate. "What's happening?" Vex demanded as equipment throughout the command center began to malfunction, screens flickering and control panels sparking. Theo raised his head and released a sound unlike anything Arlo had heard before. Not quite a roar, more like a resonating tone that seemed to vibrate at a frequency that made the very air ripple. The sound penetrated everything, including the minds of everyone present. And with that sound came images, shared memories from the crystal and from Theo's genetic memory, broadcasting telepathically to every person in the command center. They saw the Draconoids' peaceful civilization, their efforts to help other species, their horror at discovering the GA's weapons program, and finally, the systematic hunting and extermination of their kind to keep the secret. Some of the GA personnel recoiled in shock. Others looked sick with the realization of what they'd been part of. Admiral Vex, however, remained unmoved. "Clever trick," she snarled, drawing sidearm. "But sentiment won't stop what's necessary." Before she could fire, the entire station shuddered violently. Warning klaxons blared as a technician called out in panic. Admiral, the weapon, it's activating on its own. Energy levels are rising beyond safety parameters. On the main view screen, the cone-shaped device they passed was now fully illuminated, its rings spinning at increasing speed as energy arced between them. Shut it down, Vex ordered, momentarily distracted from Arlo and Theo. We can't, another technician responded. The controls aren't responding. It's building to discharge. Understanding dawned on Vex's face as she turned back to Theo. The creature is interfacing with the weapon somehow. Arlo felt it too. Through their connection, he could sense Theo reaching out with his mind, not to control the weapon, but to disrupt it. The dragon was pulling energy from the device, channeling it through himself in a way that was clearly painful but determined. What are you doing? Arlo asked mentally. Theo's response came as impressions rather than words. The weapon cannot be allowed to exist. Its energy can be transformed, redirected. But the process is dangerous. Dangerous how? Arlo demanded, watching as Theo's scales began to glow with increasing intensity, veins of light spreading across his body. Too much energy for one draconoid. Might not survive. No. Arlo tightened his grip on Theo. There has to be another way. Around them, chaos had erupted. Some personnel were fleeing the command center, while others worked frantically to regain control of the weapon. Admiral Vex was shouting orders, her composure finally cracking as her project spiraled toward catastrophe. The station shook again, more violently this time. Through the view screens, Arlo could see energy discharges rippling throughout the lower levels, destroying equipment and compromising structural integrity. The station will tear itself apart at this rate, someone yelled. Theo's body was now painfully hot to touch, but Arlo refused to let go. The dragon looked at him with eyes that glowed like miniature suns, projecting a single, clear thought. Trust me. In that moment, Arlo made his decision. He had spent his life feeling purposeless, unwanted. Now, faced with the choice between self-preservation and standing by the one being who had truly connected with him, there was no real choice at all. I'm with you, he said aloud. Whatever you need to do. They have a chance. Captain Thorne entered the cargo bay, stopping in awe at the sight of the fully matured draconoid. The council will want to meet with you both, he said after recovering his composure. Your testimony will be crucial in ensuring nothing like this happens again. And after that, Arlo asked. Thorne smiled. That will be up to you. But given the circumstances, I imagine the council would be open to suggestions. Theo's voice resonated in both their minds now. We must find the other eggs. Restore our kind. Ensure the galaxy remembers the lesson of today. That power without compassion leads only to destruction. Arlo grinned up at his friend. Sounds like a mission to me. He turned to Thorne. We'll need a ship. Something big enough for him to fit comfortably. The captain laughed. I believe that can be arranged. As the diplomatic cruiser journeyed toward the Galactic Council's headquarters, Arlo stood beside Theo, watching stars streak by through the cargo bay's viewports. For the first time in his memory, he felt not just purpose but belonging. Not bad for an unwanted orphan and a discount dragon. Huh, he said, leaning against Theo's warm scales. The dragon's rumbling, mental laughter filled his mind. Perhaps that is the universe's greatest wisdom, that the discarded and overlooked often matter most in the end. Arlo nodded, thinking of the closed door of the orphanage behind him and the open galaxy ahead. Maybe being unwanted just means you haven't found the right place yet. Theo lowered his massive head until his eye was level with Arlo's. Or the right friend. In the weeks that followed, the Galactic Council indeed provided them with a custom ship, large enough for a growing draconoid, with specialized equipment to help detect the unique energy signatures of hidden eggs. They named it Unwanted, a joke that became a badge of honor as their reputation grew. For each egg they recovered, each young draconoid they helped, they spread the story of corruption exposed, of a weapon unmade, of a planet killer program dismantled. But most importantly, They shared the truth of how an orphan boy and a baby dragon nobody wanted had found in each other the family they both needed, and in doing so had saved not just a station or a planet, but the possibility of peace throughout the stars. Word of their work spread to distant systems. Children told tales of the boy and his dragon who sought out the lost and forgotten. Adults whispered of the balance restored between technology and compassion. And in the highest chambers of the Galactic Council, new treaties were written, enshrining protections for all sentient species and establishing the Draconoid Restoration Project. When asked by journalists or officials why he continued his dangerous work when he could have chosen a life of comfort and recognition, Arlo's answer was always the same. Everyone deserves to be wanted by someone. Everything changes when you find that connection. At night, flying between stars on Theo's now massive back, Arlo would often think about the strange vendor in that dirty market stall and how the cheapest, most unwanted item there had turned out to be the most valuable thing in the galaxy. Not for its power or rarity, but for the bond it had created. And as other young Draconoids joined their fleet, each paired with an orphan selected from systems throughout the galaxy, Arlo and Theo watched their family grow, healing the wounds of the past by building something new. A future where being unwanted was just the first step in a journey toward finding where you truly belonged. The Draconoid Restoration Initiative, as it came to be officially known, became a symbol of hope throughout the galaxy. Each mission followed a similar pattern, tracking energy signatures that matched Theo's original egg, recovering the dormant Draconoids, and pairing them with children who, like Arlo, had been overlooked by society. The symmetry was not lost on anyone, the unwanted finding value in each other. 5 years after their fateful meeting in the market, Arlo stood on the observation deck of their flagship, a massive vessel called Sanctuary that housed dozens of Draconoid human pairs. At 17, he had grown tall and confident, but throughout the bridge crew, all former orphans, all bonded with Draconoids of their own. Their work had not been without challenges. Remnants of Admiral Vex's organization still operated in shadows, believing that controlling the Draconoids would give them power beyond imagining. Twice they had nearly lost recovered eggs to raiders. Once, Arlo himself had been captured, enduring 3 harrowing days before Theo and the team had orchestrated a rescue that left his captors in awe of Draconoid loyalty. The bond between Draconoid and human had proven to be more than friendship. It was a biological synchronicity that scientists were still struggling to understand. Brain scans showed that paired humans and Draconoids developed matching neural patterns over time, their minds becoming complementary in ways that enhanced both species. Draconoids gained greater emotional intelligence and creative problem-solving abilities, while humans experienced increased sensory perception and, in some cases, limited telepathic abilities of their own. "Shall we set course for Lyrica, then?" asked Kel, their young navigator whose Draconoid, Nimbus, assisted in plotting the complex hyperspace calculations that made their rapid response possible. "Yes," Arlo confirmed, "but first, let's make a stop. There's something I've been meaning to do." This something was a deviation from their usual mission, a return to Sonora, or rather, to the new station that had been built to replace the original after its destruction. The symbolism wasn't subtle. Arlo wanted to visit the place where everything began to see what had changed and what remained the same. The new Sonora station gleamed in the void, its architecture more graceful than its utilitarian predecessor. Gone were the shadowy corners and secretive installations. In their place stood transparent observation domes and public gardens, a physical manifestation of the GA's new commitment to openness. Most significant was the central plaza, dominated by a monument Arlo had only seen in transmissions, a stylized sculpture of a human hand and a Draconoid claw reaching toward each other, formed from reclaimed metal from the original station. The plaque beneath it read simply, "From understanding comes peace." Arlo and Theo, accompanied by Captain Thorne, now Admiral Thorne, head of the reformed GA's diplomatic corps, walked through the market level. Unlike the chaotic, dirty bazaar of Arlo's youth, This was an organized commercial center with proper stalls and safety regulations. Hard to believe this is the same place, Arlo mused, looking around at the orderly aisles. Not the same place at all, Thorne corrected, and that's largely thanks to you too. The old Sonora was a symptom of what was wrong with the GA. The secrecy, the disregard for those deemed unimportant. He gestured to a group of children playing in a designated recreation area. Even the youth residence has been completely reformed. No more storage pods for sleeping. Proper education, counseling, and placement programs. Theo, who had taken a smaller form for this visit, still impressive at the size of a small shuttle, but manageable within the station's corridors, attracted odd stares from passers-by. Many approached to express gratitude or simply to witness the legendary pair in person. As they continued their tour, they passed a small shop tucked away in a corner. Something about it caught Arlo's attention. A familiar energy, perhaps, or simply intuition honed by years of searching for hidden draconoids. Inside, they found an elderly alien sorting through items that appeared far more exotic than the standardized wares elsewhere in the market. The shopkeeper looked up, three eyes blinking in rapid succession. "The egg boy returns," the alien said in a rasping voice. With his hatchling grown mighty. Arlo's heart jumped. You're the vendor who sold me Theo's egg." The three-eyed merchant inclined his head. "Different shop. Same vendor. Old trick survives, always." Theo's mental voice carried a note of curiosity. "You knew what you were selling?" "Knew enough," Trick replied, seemingly unsurprised at being addressed telepathically. "New egg special. New boy special too. Some matches written in stars. Why sell something so valuable so cheaply?" Arlo asked, the question that had lingered in his mind for years. Trick's middle eye closed in what might have been a wink. "Who says was cheap? Cost you everything you had. Fair price for changing destiny." He moved around his counter, retrieving a small box from beneath it. "Been waiting. Knew you'd return someday." The box he placed on the counter was crafted from a material that resembled petrified wood but glowed faintly from within. Payment for services to Galaxy. Curiously, Arlo opened the box. Inside lay a crystalline object similar to the one that had shattered when Theo destroyed the weapon. A data repository containing draconoid knowledge. "How did you get this?" Arlo breathed, recognizing its significance immediately. "Questions for another cycle," Trick replied enigmatically. "Some play short game, credits, power, control. Others play long game, survival, balance, future." He gestured to the crystal. "Map inside." To remaining clutches. To ancient draconoid homeworld. Theo's excitement vibrated through their mental link. The ancestral home of a species had been lost to history, its coordinates purged from databases during the systematic extermination. "Why now?" Arlo asked. "Why not give this to us years ago?" "Wasn't time," Trick said simply. "You needed to grow. Both needed to grow. Galaxy needed to heal." He closed the box and pressed it firmly into Arlo's hands. "Now is time. Final chapter begins." As they left the shop, crystal secure in Arlo's pocket, Admiral Thorne shook his head in amazement. 5 years chasing draconoid eggs across the galaxy, and we never thought to check if that vendor knew more than he was telling. "Sometimes the answers are where the questions began," Theo observed philosophically, his mental voice reaching both his companions. Back aboard Sanctuary, the crystal revealed its secrets, not just coordinates to the remaining draconoid eggs scattered across distant systems, but a complete star map to a planet designated only as Genesis in the ancient draconoid language. The world existed in a star system thought uninhabitable, hidden within a nebula that scrambled conventional sensors. "It will be dangerous," Kell warned, analyzing the navigational data. "The nebula interferes with standard propulsion systems. We could be stranded, or we could find the original home of my species," Theo countered. "Perhaps even living draconoids who escaped the purge." The decision was unanimous among the crew. Despite the risks, they would journey to Genesis, completing the circle that began with a single unwanted egg in a market stall. The voyage took weeks, requiring careful navigation through the nebula's charged particles and gravitational anomalies. More than once, they nearly turned back as systems failed and power fluctuated. But finally, emerging from the swirling cosmic gases, they beheld a sight that stole their breath. A blue-green world orbiting a stable yellow star, its atmosphere shimmering with an iridescence reminiscent of draconoid scales. As they entered orbit, their sensors detected enormous life forms moving across the planet's surface. Adult draconoids, hundreds of them, living freely in their natural environment. They survived, Theo whispered in awe, his mental voice breaking with emotion. My people survived. When they landed, they were greeted not with suspicion, but with a telepathic chorus of welcome that brought tears to every human crew member's eyes. The Genesis Draconoids had known of their coming, had, in fact, orchestrated it from the beginning. The egg you purchased was no accident, explained the eldest of the Genesis Draconoids, a massive silver-scaled being named Eldrax. When the purge began, our most gifted seers foresaw a possible future, one where our kind would be saved not through force or vengeance, but through connection with another species. So you deliberately scattered eggs where they might be found by humans? Arlo asked, trying to comprehend the scale of such a plan. By specific humans, Eldrax corrected. Those whose minds and hearts were compatible with our own. The unwanted ones, the overlooked ones, those whose capacity for empathy remained undamaged by privilege or power. The revelation transformed their understanding of everything that had happened. Their mission hadn't been a response to tragedy, but the fulfillment of a plan set in motion generations ago, a plan to forge an unbreakable alliance between species that would reshape galactic society. In the days that followed, humans and draconoids shared knowledge, culture, and vision. The Genesis Draconoids possessed technological understanding far beyond current GA science, particularly in sustainable energy and ecological balance. The humans offered perspective on emotional connections and creative adaptation that the highly logical draconoids found fascinating. Together, they formulated what would become known as the Genesis Accord, a framework for a new type of interspecies collaboration based not on dominance or exploitation, but on complementary strengths. The Accord would eventually expand to include dozens of species, each finding their unique role in a more balanced galaxy. On their final night on Genesis, Arlo stood beneath alien stars with Theo, watching young draconoids teaching human children the basics of flight. The symmetry of it all struck him profoundly. How a single act of kindness toward an unwanted creature had cascaded into a movement that was healing ancient wounds and creating new possibilities. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't bought that egg? Theo asked, his mental voice gentle in the evening stillness. Arlo smiled. Sometimes. But then I remember what you told me about draconoid seers and destiny. Maybe there was never really a choice. Maybe our paths were always going to converge. Perhaps, Theo conceded. But it still took courage to make that choice, to spend everything you had on something unknown. Best 20 units I ever spent, Arlo laughed, leaning against his friend's warm scales. As Sanctuary departed Genesis a week later, they carried with them not just new knowledge and allies, but a profound sense of purpose. The unwanted egg and the lonely orphan had indeed saved not just a planet, but set in motion the salvation of an entire galaxy, proving once and for all that value isn't determined by price or status, but by the connections we forge and the courage to see potential where others see only the discarded and overlooked. And somewhere in the vastness of space, an old vendor with 3 eyes watched the unfolding of events with satisfaction, knowing that the long game, the very longest game of all, was proceeding exactly as it should.